So, Jutta, we today gonna talk about your book, Company-Wide Agility with Beyond Budgeting, Open Space on Sociocracy. I mean, there are a few techniques inside the title itself, but maybe let's start by why you wrote the book in the first place. What kind of problems that you are trying to solve?
So first of all, I co-wrote it with John Beck, and what I saw was around that book mainly two things. So the one thing was teams in organizations were quite successful using an agile approach. So other parts in the organization said, oh, can we benefit from this as well? And what could we do in order to be more agile as the company? The other thing that we also saw was that some teams were not so successful. When we dig deeper into what's the key problem, then it was, well, the organization, so their ecosystem wasn't agile enough. They couldn't really benefit fully from their agile approach. So if you will, one driver was success and the other one was maybe failure. And then, of course, also around that time, the discussion about business agility started, which is another thing. There's just many things where you could look at and say, well, what companies are doing if they are not agile, maybe in many cases, it doesn't fit what's really needed. What we see is happening right now is that we have this world that keeps changing so that it's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So the VUCA world we are living in, and companies just need to respond to that. For me, a key way to respond to the VUCA world is being agile as an organization. I'm not talking about Scrum here. I'm talking about agile more in the literal sense. So being flexible, adaptive, responsive, nimble, more like that.
So I think throughout the last few years as well, we can see as Agile has transformed a lot of software development teams. I mean, the concept of Agile methodology started maybe from a software development team from the manifesto. And then as more and more people adopted it, I guess it was also quite popular and hugely successful, where now the concept of applying it to other parts of organization. I think if I'm not wrong, I've heard things like Agile HR, Agile marketing, maybe Agile budgeting and things like that. So why do you think so many different departments also need to adopt these Agile practices or mindset? Maybe you can explore a little bit on that.
Yeah, well, exactly for the same VUCA reasons, because they're facing complexity and they need to deal with it. They need to be responsive and adaptive. And so they look at what's working somewhere else. Agile software development is working at other places. And it's, of course, also very promising to work in various non-software places. Meanwhile, a lot of people have tried it and explored and figured that it is helping them. Now, with the Bossa Nova, actually, we are more looking across the departments. It's also more than business agility. It is really looking at the company level. What can you do as the whole company to really be that way agile in that literal sense, really?
In your book, also, you mentioned one particular thing, which I think is quite insightful, right? Because traditionally, companies tend to maximize shareholder values. That is like the ultimate goal of company traditionally. But with all these recent changes, maybe with Agile concept as well, customers should become the first point of reference for the company's success. So tell us more about this perspective where you shift from shareholder value to people to customer. And what would you advocate that a company should look at as a reference point?
Actually, beyond budgeting does that a lot as well, is that if you look at only the shareholder, then this is probably also what you get. You only provide value for the shareholder, which is typically very short-term thinking. Whereas if you focus on customer value, you get additionally the shareholder value. However, what we also think, and that's again kind of what Beyond Budgeting also says, if we are focusing on the employees, then the employees ensure that the customer will happy and this will make the shareholder happy. And so we have this whole chain of providing value for everyone in our ecosystem, actually. It's way more long-term than if we just look at the shareholder. The interesting thing about this is, I think it's about 4 years ago. So where the Business Roundtable, that's a kind of an institution in the US, got together, and it has like the leading CEOs of the American industry. They made that shift as well. They said, well, in the past, we have only focused on the shareholder value, but we see that this isn't appropriate for the times anymore. And maybe also we have learned that it is too short-sighted, and we need to really think more about the employees and the customer and the shareholder, and actually as well about the environment we are in.
So if I can just repeat, it's a sequential thing, right? So put focus more on your people. When you have engaged, happy employees, it will translate to good customer value. Maybe they produce good products or good services. Once the customer value also increase, people are happy, and the shareholder ultimately will also benefit. And you brought up as the last point, we should also think about the environmental aspect, the sustainability, which is quite trendy these days as well. People are talking a lot about it. So thanks for sharing this as a sequential focus that any company should think about for leaders
Yes,
out
and
there
that
as well.
sequence, the way you just pointed it out, that's absolutely the way I thought of saying it. That's correct. Thank you for
Right.
summarizing that.